The bell has rung. So get seated and join Elementary Schooled for today's interview.
Welcome to Elementary Schooled Season 1, Episode 11. Welcome Superintendent Daniel Linford of Davis School District in Davis County, Utah. Today, you are answering common questions from parents and educators regarding a variety of topics pertaining to elementary school students. So thank you for accepting the invitation. Because we work in the same district, I'm a fourth grade job share in the same district, but I haven't met you before today. So first of all, it's nice to meet you. And thank you for accepting the invitation.
My pleasure.
I really appreciate it. I know your time is valuable. I do want to read your bio real quick. Dr. Daniel Linford, you are the 19th superintendent to lead the Davis School District. With 23 years of experience in education, you began your educational career as a high school English teacher in 1999. Very nice. In 2006, you moved into an administrative role as an assistant principal and then principal in 2011. You served as a secondary school director from 2016 to 2022. And you are also a product of this same school district. That probably comes in handy, I'm guessing. You hold a bachelor's degree in English from Weber State University and a master's degree and doctorate in educational leadership and policy from the University of Utah. Your doctoral research focused on the superintendency in Utah. As a result, you were able to meet and learn from superintendents from across the state long before you imagined you would join their ranks. You are married to your high school sweetheart, Shanna. Did I say that right? Who is a second grade teacher. And I want you to know, when I read that, I thought, oh, that's how I know it's all going to be okay. Because that just gives you insight right there. You have 5 children and 3 grandchildren. It sounds like a full and remarkable life.
It's been good so far.
Again, I want to thank you for your valuable time. And will you start just by describing the size of Davis District and how many of each type of school are within your stewardship?
So we have just over 72,000 students in our district, 62 elementary schools, 17 junior high schools, and we're building a few more of each of those categories soon, and then 10 high schools, and that includes our alternative high school.
And I read both. Are we the second largest or the third largest in Utah?
We are the second largest school district in Utah.
And that's based on enrollment or schools?
That is based on enrollment.
Okay.
You know, we may actually challenge with the most schools in that regard, but we are the second largest by student population. You know, and Davis County it's interesting because we're the smallest geographical county. You know, if you count just the portion that's not in the Great Salt Lake, although that part's growing every day.
Yes.
We are the smallest geographic county in the state, so we have a lot of people in a small area.
I'd love for listeners to get some insight just by knowing, how many emails do you think you get a day?
Yeah, it really does vary. On some days I go, I can't believe, where are the emails? I've even checked with my assistant. Are they coming through? Because, you know, some days there'll be as little as maybe 50 emails, but I would say on the average, probably 80 to 100. Some days it's 130 or 40, and some days it's 60 or 70. But most days hover right around 80 to 100.
Okay. No, that gives kind of some insight. I'm sure your role as superintendent of such a big district, you have endless tasks, but what would you say your main responsibility is?
There's no question. My first responsibility and the responsibility that I think about the most and spend the most time working with is really ensuring what we call a world-class education. We want to be the very best. Many see us as the very best. But regardless of how folks outside of our district see us, the most important thing is that When we look at our students, we know that we're providing them the very best possible education, and that weighs on us, because we also don't. I wish all 80 to 100 emails were about that, but they're about all kinds of concerns, and that encompasses a lot. A world-class education, we need to think about student safety. We need to think about how students engage in the classroom, and a lot of that comes back to how they feel in school, and how, just like all of us, when we're having a bad day, it's really tough to learn and be productive. So we think about all of those things, and rely, as you know, on great teachers to get that accomplished.
Thank you for that clarification. Since the focus of this podcast is to help the elementary school age child and those working with these kids, let's talk about some issues that are affecting our kids. And one that's actually made the local news recently, and I was kind of shocked at the stats, but also believed it as a teacher, is our issue of absenteeism. I'm actually interviewing the State Board of Education specialist in a couple of weeks with this topic, but I did want your response to why do you think we're having a hard time, or what does the data show why we're having a hard time getting our kids back to school after COVID, and what can we do about it, in your opinion?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's another one we grapple with, really, at all levels. There's no question that the pandemic sort of reset some things, and we set some new baselines when that happened. I don't know if we're talking about the same news story, but I saw a news story where they didn't really use our data because it didn't fit the mold exactly. So 2020, we had just under that, I think 95.8% or so, 95.9. And then during the pandemic, of course, that dropped to 92.2. But it dropped in. That is such an unreliable statistic because it's based on a lot of remote learning and some of those things. So
Sure.
it's difficult to really measure what attendance really means. We all know what it means during a regular school year. And then in 22, we really bounced back fairly well. I think people were anxious to get back to school. And then this past year, we're at about almost 95%. So for our district, from 2019 to today, we've looked at a 1.4% drop, which you think about each one of those kiddos, that's each one, that 1.4%, that represents several hundred kids. We not only want them to come, we have an obligation to make sure that those kids come to school. Although we haven't experienced it in the way that some districts have experienced that drop in Davis District. We still experienced a drop. And so some of the things that we really work on is our outreach. In fact, our training tomorrow with administrators and our training in November with administrators was really all about outreach and connecting with the community and making sure that each family feels that this is my school, and each student thinks about the school they attend as their school and the place where they belong, and it starts there. So we want to do more things to invite and include the community, and remind folks that these are their schools from their communities.
I'm glad to hear you say that, because I just did a recent interview about connection and how that's one thing that we're really trying to get back on track, where there was such a time of disconnect. How do you respond to how we approach when families are struggling?
And that's, I mentioned that training, that's the central piece of it. Making sure that our schools feel like hometown schools. And by that, really, we're talking about that outreach. We're talking about that personal connection and creating spaces. And that's education language for, and creating an environment that I'd want to go to as a parent and as a student. And so sometimes with folks, especially if they haven't been attending, and this was my experience as a principal years ago, if you have students who are just not attending, but otherwise everything else is okay, you need to invite them in. They need to hear your voice, and they need to hear
That's right.
from you. Because the nitty gritty of it is they're a taxpayer and this is their school. But beyond that, that's our relationship. That's our goal. That's how we see ourselves as a school system, that we're part of this community, and a really important part of that. So if we're not behaving like neighbors, if we're behaving like bureaucrats and we have these policies and systems, and if you don't attend, we'll mark you down and send you that letter. We're getting it wrong if that's all that we're doing. So that is a big piece of our training.
Thank you. That's a good
So anyway,
reminder. I just want you to know that most recent stats I read are from 2021 on this, but we have 1,600 schools in 24 states right now that are going to a Fridays off for students. And I just would love to hear your response about that, because as a teacher during COVID, when we did have we didn't have Fridays off. And technically the students really didn't either. We could approach them through Zoom and do some one-on-one. Oh, it was so great. And one benefit was just that teachers really got the prep time that's kind of been taken away from us in a lot of ways. So what do you think about that? Fridays off for students, but teachers are there.
well, we had some success doing that as a district. And I think it took some of the pressure off of students during a time that was just really uncertain as well. Lots of layers to that. I mean, one, we still are only beginning to really measure the potential losses to learning during that time. There's interesting research that reflects that, we know that the more time spent learning, the more students will learn. The strongest argument for seat time is just that we know that, and specifically within state law, we're required to have instruction for a certain number of hours and a certain number of days. And so some of it based in state law, that would be, we would need a broad system approach to even considering Fridays off in our state. We had parents that had real concern, and community leaders that had real concern about having a 4-day school week. We know that with time off, even with Christmas break, there's learning loss. But eventually they're not in school anymore. And then how quickly do we lose our learning? And so one of our great goals is to create lifelong learners. That's in almost every mission statement in our district. And sure. I think there's a lot of appreciation for that idea of students having Fridays off, or prescriptive Fridays where students that need extra help could come, that kind of thing. But there would need to be a lot of systems in place to allow for that. And I'm not sure that we still understand the significance of the potential learning loss for cutting out a full day of learning.
It's one of those questions that's out there, but it's being talked about and looks like it's being tried in other places. Maybe it'll be interesting to see what their data shows in a few years, if that was positive or not, or if we have more gaps in the learning because of that. So thank you for answering that. For this interview, I did ask on an open forum, a few open forums on social media for questions. And what I found interesting is it wasn't just Utah based. So it wasn't, necessarily right to our district or even to our state, but other educators and parents in other states were chiming in. And I tried to take the top questions that had some commonality to them. But I received many questions about learning programs which require a great deal of screen time, both in the classroom and outside the classroom. There is legitimate concern, and I think especially talking about the elementary child. There is concern about students having too much screen time when we're seeing so much suffering with social and emotional health to our kids. How do you respond to that?
I share that concern. Talking about, most of the research points to that passive screen time, that using it to entertain, social media where they're kind of mindlessly strumming through social media, versus even research that tells us some social media leads to broader friend circles, more confidence, more social children if they're active participants, but too many aren't, and are not positive active participants, aren't doing positive things, spreading positive things. So there's kind of two pieces here. One, there's passive screen time, and then there's active learning, because we also are committed to delivering instruction in engaging and effective ways, and really ways that prepare students for the world that they're going to live in and work in. And so it is interesting as we think about preparing students. Of course, we would be fools if we didn't equip students with laptops and the latest technology and prepare them to work in a space where this is this is going to be one of the major tools of your life. But managing that passive learning, that sit and get style learning, that you could have, instructional programs that basically the student is sitting there learning, and it's no different than the teacher that lectures every period, all period. Or when you and I were probably going to school and you had the teacher that says, read the chapter and answer the questions in the back of the book, that kind of mindless, on your own type learning, versus an active engaged learning. And we know that students, we see engagement go up with technology, but it's really easy as an educator, and it's really easy as a parent to let that entertain students and take the time that otherwise would be yours to fill. So we're concerned about that. We do not support a model where a student walks into a classroom and spends the entire period, or even the vast majority of the period, on a device on their own. So yeah, we agree. And although we can't control what happens when they leave us, from my own experience with my own children, I fear that they're too attached to phones and the screen time that's hard to measure in the hallways, at lunch, after school, all night long, that we really see the research pointing to as a concern.
I want to ask a specific question from a parent. And she said, in terms of elementary, my fourth grader is in tears doing the Summit Learning program because she feels like she is not being taught anything. And this parent wondered, will there be, and when would there be, an option to opt out? Is there anything you can say about that that helps this parent?
Well, so if a student is in tears because of Summit, then that kind of goes back to the challenge I talked about earlier, that we're not implementing Summit properly if a student feels like they're not being taught anything. There are elementaries all around the country, hundreds that use the Summit platform. We actually we caught onto the Summit platform about 6 years ago. And some of it came from this idea that the schools we visited were incredible and were the strongest performing schools in their districts. Summit was born in Silicon Valley, and there was part of me that thought, well, if it's good for this kind of Ivy League pipeline district to use Summit, it's probably we can handle that too. But it was really visiting a school in Greeley, Colorado, a Title I school, who should have been, and had historically been, performing at the bottom of their district. They were performing at the top of their district. And it was really talking to students, a class of seventh graders, that really made me think this is worth full engagement on our part. We really need to look into this platform. Because what I saw was a lot of what looked like very traditional instruction, coupled with the ability for students to learn at the pace, either advanced pace or a slower pace, based on what they needed. And then a lot of incredible teacher engagement. What I can say is that, we see it nationally, but certainly locally, is that Summit students outperform, or at least perform with their peers, if not outperform their peers, because it is rigorous. Summit's one of the few platforms that I'm aware of that really measures that against a standard every step of the way. The real question is opting out of Summit, and I think we've been asked that question multiple times, and it is a challenging one, because first of all, Summit becomes a catch-all for every struggle in school. If I'm talking about literally the same exact kinds of issues at a traditional school, or even a school that's using Canvas, it's not Summit's fault, it's the teacher's fault, or it's something else. When it's using the Summit platform, that's become a catch-all for improvements that we need to make in general. And sometimes it's not even a Summit issue. It's because Summit is a platform that really houses curriculum and then guides doing assignments ultimately. Whereas in a lot of our schools that use competency-based models, but not Summit, very similar in terms of structure. And we hear very similar concerns because it's new. It's not the read the chapter and answer the questions in the back. It's not 40 minutes of lecture. It is very project based, learning based, and a lot of rigor. And by rigor, I don't mean hard stuff. I mean, we're going to make sure and measure your learning throughout the process.
The number one concern and question was regarding the Summit Learning Program. Actually, there are a lot of parents that are up in arms. If you have a student that is a really independent learner and takes an active role, like you said, in their learning, then it does work really well. But the feedback is that there are a lot of students it's not working for, but maybe you could clear the air on this. One comment was, why do we need to have a Summit Learning Program in place when we do have Canvas already? And that's used on a university level. And if that's what we're leading up to, starting in elementary, and we're leading up to getting them familiar and working well in Canvas, why do we need Summit on top of that?
Well, that is a school by school choice, first of
Okay.
all. That is a, we believe in that local control. So that is a school choice to
So
adopt
a principal or administration of a school can say, there's no contract with the state or with a district in
Oh,
terms
no.
of, okay, there's no contract.
No.
Okay.
In fact, Summit is free. Canvas is not free. Summit is free. And Summit actually pays for all of the training for the staff, all the in-service, and the supports are free. That said, both are what we call learning management systems. Summit's a more complete learning management system, and frankly, Summit's in my opinion, my children are also on Summit. I moved purposely into a Summit boundary, and given that we're talking about a learning management system, I don't think Canvas is even close in terms of engagement. Students report much higher engagement in Summit than in Canvas. Students like the platform. Again, back to what I think the real challenge is. The real challenge is if we were using if we were using Canvas with the competency-based model, a personalized competency-based model, I think we would have the same concerns. I think we'd be calling it Canvas or whatever we decided to call the LMS. I think the real challenge is that it is such a new system, and this idea that there is stress to show your competency. But what we found in some of the research, and a department at BYU researched the program the first year, and the chief finding they found was that students reported less stress than in a traditional system. And it's easy to forget after a year what the end of term felt like and what it felt like when you got that grade that you could never bring up, because we in a traditional system you say, hey, that B+ you got first term, that's yours forever as your badge for not knowing it then. I don't care that you know it now, you didn't know it then, so that's your grade forever. And I think a competency-based system is a more authentic measure of learning. I'm paid as a teacher to teach a student certain objectives and standards. And if they've met those objectives and standards, I should give them credit for that, even if they didn't learn it at the same time as their peers. But a traditional system says, no, it doesn't matter. That grade's your grade. And now this new term is your chance to show me that you've learned it now, even though it was my job to teach it back then and I didn't, and you didn't learn it. We're not going to let you go back. Well, we say in a competency-based model that, yeah, we should make learning king. We should make learning the objective king. Not, you should really learn this. It's really critical that you learn it, except past the due date. And then I don't even care if you learn it. I'm not even going to check on it to see if you learn it. We really want to get out of that mindset. Now that comes with some drawbacks, and that, I've had concerns myself about procrastination when kids know they know that they have more time, and so they do procrastinate. But that'll be something that's with us for the rest of our lives. I mean, I have very few due dates as an adult. I have some deadlines when people ask me to hand something in at a certain time, and there's certain reports I have to file at a certain time. But generally speaking, I need to be in charge of my own schedule and drive myself. And a competency-based system does that. And again, students are learning at high levels. So the short answer is I think those schools believe that Summit's a better platform. From for what they're trying to accomplish, which is competency-based, personalized instruction.
And how can we have maybe a little more collaboration or just basic information on what the program really is? I don't know. I heard this recently. It's actually a line from the New Testament that says, "Come and see." That's kind of my thing in the class whenever I feel like in the news or I hear somebody, "Oh, what's going on in the classroom?" And I'm like, "Come and see, come and hang out with me for an entire day," but it has to be a whole day, just to see what it's really like. Is there a way that we could give parents and families some real insight to what the program is to better understand it? And it would be really sad to think that it's not working for a group of students. And is that really true? And what is their work ethic like in the program? Is there a way that it can be evaluated?
I think schools are interested in doing that, and some schools have spent a significant amount of time measuring that. A lot of it is, you look at some of our schools that have been doing Summit for longer periods of time, and you go talk to their elected parent representatives and the kind of support that they have for Summit. I've personally walked through some of our schools and encourage people, just point the direction. We'll go visit classes. And I do think that's really valuable. And we've done that a lot. We've done that with principals, definitely, who have heard this or that and wanted to know for themselves. So I think it's really valuable to go into those schools and see, why is their achievement so high? Why do schools from around the country visit us based on our achievement, and want to know more about what we're doing? And it's far less about Summit, and it's far more about competency-based instruction. So yeah, I think schools should. I think typically they are willing to say, "Come on in, come see," and I think that is really valuable.
I do too. And so we would encourage parents, right, to say,
Yeah,
if you are
absolutely.
having always a real issue, please go and ask the questions, talk to your teachers or administrators and see what's really happening with that, and see if you can get to a good place with your child. This is a little bit related, but can you walk us through how decisions are made when it comes to which programs a district decides to adopt, even for smaller programs? How are these decisions made, and is it all based on data?
Theoretically, yeah. We would never adopt a program, and I say we would never because we have a process. If we're talking about primary instruction materials, which sounds like mostly you are,
Yes.
we're talking about following our outline district policy on that, which involves an extensive parental and classroom teacher input on those committees. Now those folks get the data download. They see the research and they're given all of that information. The folks that are most intimately involved and are really charged with making that decision on those curriculum adoption committees. Now the supplemental instructional materials are usually determined at the site. There's a process at each school for receiving input. And of course, all of our purchases of that nature, curriculum and those things, follow our purchasing guidelines and all of those transparency things that we're committed to. But I think the big piece there is our curriculum adoption. And
when you say curriculum, I just want to clarify, when you say curriculum adoption committee, that is a specific committee that usually most districts have?
Yes, most have, I think, some kind of an adoption committee. If they're not, they're not getting it right.
Okay.
We were actually held up as a model in the state because of the parental outreach we have. I mean, for example, the most recent one that I participated in was on a Zoom call, and we were expecting up to 150 folks who had signed up to come review, but only I think just over 40 actually showed up to do it. So it's not glamorous work. But we do. We're always, so those folks, I mean, whoever asked that question, I would say get involved. Because the vast majority
anyone
of
that wants to can be on the curriculum adoption committee.
well, they can be assigned to one of the committees, and maybe all of them, because we're almost perennially shorthanded there.
And that leads to a question by a teacher. If a teacher has an issue with a learning program, you're like, oh, I really don't know that this is best for kids, where do we take that?
It runs the gamut depending on the exact situation, but I would always start with my principal. I think one of the things, we've had whole schools on a completely different math program in the past. We've had, if we see real concern, we say, well, what's the solution then? I think sometimes there's maybe this sense that, oh, the district's dismissing this concern with curriculum. And you say, well, this has been so vetted by our state, a very conservative state, in a district like ours that's a conservative district, and I mean that with a small c. Like, we like our traditional system, we think it's strong, but we do want to take steps based on, we lean on effect size, like learning effect size, a lot in our district. My superintendency team focuses on what does the research say about these approaches. The same goes for these programs. If a school says, or a teacher says, I have real concerns about learning, and I've told you, I'm married to a second grade teacher, and
I love it.
so I hear it. The most influential person in my life by a long shot. Sometimes she's more influential than my own brain, and so I hear it. I know it. I know it. I feel it in my bones, in my home. Some of the things that I've been involved placing on the shoulders of teachers. And I say involved because, the state adopts curriculum. There are grants, but the grants require rarely a specific program, more often a program that does these things that we know are what's best for literacy or math or whatever. But if a school, the short answer is yes, please talk to us. If we trust our experts in the field, and those are our teachers. And so there's no question, when we adopt a district-wide program, a lot of it is so we have great support at the district level so that we can train, so that it's not the Wild West out there.
Sure.
It's already the Wild West with a lot of the programs we have out in schools. But for sure, short answer, please bring that to us. Principal's a good first stop. But obviously with math, the STEM team, those folks, we have lots of conversations about teacher concern, and we'd love to hear that.
Thank you. I think that clears up a lot of maybe confusion. And I know your time is short. I had some really good questions, so let's see if we can fly through some of these.
Yeah.
But this is a question from a parent. How often are school safety measures looked at and updated, which is something on all of our brains, no matter where you live?
Short answer is we review them every year. We're one of the few districts that have full-time security officers that are paid to stay ahead of the game on this. We have, the safety and security committee, and that's an annual evaluation. But anytime, and you probably imagine you've seen this as a teacher, anytime that there's an incident around the country, and I'm going to call it a knee-jerk reaction, but we always evaluate based on the new information. Well, what if that happened here? What does that look like? And do our protocols respond? We see that. I've trained on our safety protocols in my church. I've trained those because they're industry standards as well, and they're really our best shot at predicting the unpredictable. So we're always looking. One thing I'm proud of our district about is we're ahead of the game on security. We're ahead of the game on secure vestibules, on security cameras, on security personnel. Our commitment from our school resource officers is, I think, the strongest in the state. Our model makes the most sense. So we're growing safety measures. We're spending millions on it because there's also bullet resistant film on windows and all the other things that we're doing. We really take that seriously.
Thank you. And I always come back to, I want to emphasize that school remains one of the safest places where you can be.
Absolutely.
So we want to emphasize that. This question is from both a teacher and a parent. Why do many districts, and she said like ours, prioritize athletics over fine arts?
As an arts guy, I can speak to this a little bit from my own experience. There's in the arts, we tend to wear it on our sleeve a little bit, that we don't get the respect. But I'll tell you, even within athletics, the majority of those teams feel like, oh, we don't get near the respect of these teams. And the school makes all the announcements and they get the big stadium or the big arena, and everyone comes to that. And some of that is, people vote with their feet. Some of it comes down to that, why this team doesn't get the same respect, and however that's measured, as this team. But at the elementary level, of course, we have a lot more art programs than athletic programs. In our district, we serve in our fine arts programs and our art programs. Over 28,000 of our students are in those programs, as opposed to about 10,000 athletes in our sports programs. So some of that, I don't want to just dismiss that as, oh, that's in the eye of the beholder, because there's no question, as a society, more cultural attention is given to the Friday night football game than almost anything else we do. As a principal of a high school, I just knew my whole community is coming. I'm going to have 4 generations in the stands of people that come. This is what they do on Friday nights. And what a great opportunity to welcome in so many. And many are not even watching that game at all.
They're there for social reasons a lot of times. Sure.
It is. And our students do it for those reasons as well. So I can tell you that I don't place competitive sports over the arts. And certainly our expenditures, our own expenditures, wouldn't say that at all. Now,
so for anyone concerned that the arts are going away, you can assure us here, because I am an advocate for the arts as well, but they're not.
Changed my life. Most important thing in my life, the arts.
Well, and I'll just add to this that, actually, when I returned to the classroom, after being home with my kids for a few years, I was a music teacher for 2 years before I got my own classroom again. And but even in my own classroom, there's just no better way. If it gets chaotic, there is always a way to bring them back, is with music and with the songs. And it is a comfort to the soul, just like for most of us. But I hear what you're saying. When you talked in the beginning about having a world-class education, it sounds like you recognize that the arts are a part of that world-class education.
My wife was a music specialist for many years, and I went to one of their assemblies, and the principal was trying to get the students' attention, because you have whatever 800 elementary kids there, and they're talking, but my wife could stand up and do 3 claps and get a rhythm back, or start a song and get them in a second. So powerful instruction that comes through music and rhythm.
Thank you. Thank you for answering that. Another parent question: can you give an update on how the diversity and racial inclusion initiatives are going, and what is being done to build more trust in the community? Kind of a big question.
Well, it's one of the most important things we're doing as a district, and some of it goes back to what I talked about in terms of students feeling like that's their school and they're connected there. And for lots of reasons, students can feel disconnected, and that they don't fit in, or that the school doesn't care about them or represent them. And it's particularly tough for students of color in our district, who don't see a lot of themselves in our district and in our staff. So some of the things that we've done, of course, we created a large policy. We trained all of our staff, and the biggest training maybe in the history of the state, but definitely in the history of our district, where we trained over 9,000 of our employees on the policy.
The equity.
The equity policy. And really their responsibility as reporters. We will not ignore it. And one of the chief things that we try to ensure is that we will never be called indifferent about this again, that we will always do the right thing. We will always report it in the right way, and by reporting it, we're mostly talking about making sure that students that are saying inappropriate things or insensitive things are just being taught, or it's just a conversation about being kind. We have a HDRS reporting system where on our website, on every web page, you'll see our reporting system, where if you've experienced harassment or bullying, you can report it, or if you see it, you can report it. It's one of the few like this in the country. So we're doing things to make sure, at the minimum, we're responding to every incident. We've hired an office of equal opportunity, a great staff who investigates and builds and supports. And of course, we have ongoing training every month with administrators addressing new approaches and better ways to make sure that our schools are safe and inviting for everyone. I've been in Davis County my whole life, and that is who we want to be. We want to be these great inclusive neighbors that make people feel like they belong here.
Yeah, I thank you. And I believe that, I mean, these issues are happening everywhere. Of course, I can only give the analogy of when you start the school year and you have, set expectations or rules, and you talk to the kids about it so much at the beginning of the year. But then as the year goes on, if you don't get a lot of reminders and come back to an expectation, the kids can get desensitized, and even a teacher can get desensitized. It was just a really solid reminder of just the basics of humanity and being inclusive and being careful with how we speak. So what I'm hearing from you is we really are upping the ante and taking that seriously. Is that how you feel?
Absolutely. And there will be more, much more community outreach, surveying, focus groups. We'll continue to measure that. And really the only ways you can measure these things by talking to people. We've already been doing that work, and that will continue. Dr. Montero, my assistant superintendent, has incredible expertise in this area. He's minding the store on this and really ensuring that our eyes are on this target all the time.
Thank you. And as a participant in that equity training, I did feel like last fall that it was very valuable, very well done. And two, I think because we live in an area where we're 88%, our demographics are 88% white American. It's, just for us to all take a step back. For me, a few years ago, I had a certain situation where I had never really thought about white privilege before, but just being educated and learning, it really does help you to take some pause and put yourself in another person's shoes and say, how would it feel for me? So I'm really grateful to live in a district that is taking that seriously. And thank you for answering that. Another question real quick is from a teacher and parent. Is there a resource that teachers or parents, anyone could go to, and also just direct anyone to dispel rumors within a district? And this was mentioned a few times, and I don't know what it's like for other states or but talking about furries and other litter boxes in bathrooms, and it was getting a little out of control with the rumors there. Is there a place that you can direct everyone to really answer? Or at the same time, I could see how you wouldn't want to give some questions or rumors attention. So help us.
Well, furries, particularly the litter box conversation, particularly, that was my concern when I first was asked that question. Not only do you get asked, do we have litter boxes, but somebody knows somebody they trust that saw it with their own eyes, or a family member that saw it somewhere. So it was reported that one was in Idaho. I've heard similar stories saying we had a student body officer was barked at by a student, and they barked back, and we punished the student body officer for barking, but not the student who barked because they identify as a dog. Or those things are not true. And the good news is it's not just our district. A quick Google search, you'll see news stories. Our attorney sent me a list of something like 20 news stories from around the country debunking this litter box in the bathroom thing. So you know what, that may have almost been worth sending out an email to every home in the district.
Because it gets kind of out of control. And then this is the first
yeah.
year that I've ever been asked as a teacher. And I sorry, what?
Yeah. We actually had politicians that ran for office in our county that said it from the stage, that we have litter boxes. And
I heard
so
that.
That doesn't help.
That's when we say, come and see.
Come and see. And there
You
would
have
be
to have your background check,
pictures.
but come and see.
Yes. Can you imagine how many social media pictures there would be if there were actually litter boxes? And I worry more about a student staging a litter box and taking a picture than us actually having a litter box.
And so can there be attention given just to kind of dispel rumors? But you're saying it would be more in
there can. we are producing an FAQ page that will answer questions about all of the, I mean, several of the things we've talked about today. But we also, unfortunately, very few people look at our district page. You know, they go right to the calendar if they go to the district page, or they go right to look up a specific policy. Rarely, unfortunately, do they come, and we really rely on local teachers and administrators to dispel those kinds of rumors. So I'm glad that someone did ask a teacher, so someone they trust can say no. Because sometimes even when the superintendent says no, we're short-staffed enough to even, we struggle sometimes to replace the toilet paper with the staffing that we have, let alone taking care of litter boxes. That was just,
And our custodian, he's fantastic. And believe me, he
they're
knows how to take
amazing.
care of that.
But can you imagine making that poor person do litter boxes? Furries are not a protected class. We love our students who however they come. But even the idea that we have students walking around with tails, hissing and meowing or barking and those things disrupting class.
If that did happen, if a student really was trying to make an effort to bark or meow or lick or whatever, what is the policy or the,
our
I mean,
discipline
as a
policy,
teacher, I would just know, like, I have a student suffering and I want to help that student.
Yep.
So I would rally around but what is there some kind of, what do you say to that?
well, our discipline policy would apply there. If you're harassing a student by barking at them, we have had students that bark at people that are not trying to be furries, and we deal with that in the same way we would if a student called another student a mean name. You know, most of the time it's a teaching moment, but we just really haven't seen that.
Yeah.
You know, and it certainly to the level of the reports we've heard. We'll have, and even when I went to school, there were girls that wore the little headbands with ears on it. I have seen that, not many, but you know, we don't allow things that disrupt school. We don't allow costumes in that way.
Okay, thank you. I think that is helpful. I love that we're really just trying to put what education really is back into education. And we know we have a lot to plow through after COVID and after so many different issues have come to light. But there is a great feeling of hope and that futures are so bright. And I just want you to add to that.
Well, I agree with that. And that's my outlook. And if you don't have that outlook, come visit a school. I've learned almost everything of value from students, from young people, because they're really incredible, and the future is bright. And we have the best jobs in the world because we get to work with the future, with these incredible young people who we get to help, and we get to help shape and mold and prepare for the future. But I would echo that the future is bright, and our parents do an excellent job raising excellent students. And I think we feel blessed to be a part of that. I don't talk to an educator that doesn't feel blessed to be a part of that. And I would just say our job is to extract some joy from every day. We're going to do our best work if we're operating in our cerebral cortex, and that comes from having joy in the work that we do. So I appreciate the theme of the podcast and your approach to this, because we need it. It's been a tough couple of years, but I think people are ready to see the sunshine and to smile and to move forward.
Thank you so much. Started recording. We talked a little bit about how the whole idea of why I really wanted to start this podcast was I did get tired of hearing that there's a crisis in the classroom, and sometimes there is, but we are managing it and we're doing it, and there is such joy. And every day I have a challenge that's new, and some of them are really hard, but every day a student makes me laugh, and I see something in a student that makes me realize why I'm there. I do always try to end with a little spiritual thought. And a couple months ago, I learned this great phrase. I'm all about the phrases because I can remember them. But this is a scripture phrase that I didn't even know there was a book of Haggai. How do you like that? From the Old Testament. But this phrase says, consider your ways, which is really an invitation to all of us to consider our ways as an individual person. But it's an invitation. And what I loved about the principle behind it, I think, is so applicable to education, public education especially. But this principle of, we have plenty of food, but we're hungry. We have plenty of water, but we are thirsty. And so I think of We have plenty of amazing programs and technology resources and advancements in technology and more than we've ever had before, yet we are thirsty and hungry for what would really sustain us. But I think a lot of what you talked about today is what is sustaining us, and that is education is a place of learning. And we're really trying to do what's best for students, most people in education, not everybody. Those stories make the headlines, but most people in education really we are considering our ways and trying to do things differently. And I just want you to respond to that real quick before we sign off.
Amen, Melanie. I agree. I think we need to always be introspective, and we need to always, if we're not trying to improve, we're doing it wrong, and that takes work and that takes commitment. But when you look at the little faces in our classrooms, and they're worth every bit of that commitment, and I see that in the faces of our great teachers and educators. So yeah, I'm super hopeful, and that we'll continue to evaluate and continue to listen. We have a lot of listening and learning to do yet with our community. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to be with you.
Thank you. It's all about the listening and learning. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us today. And maybe I'll connect with your wife sometime and we can talk elementary education.
I hope so. She's the better half.
I love it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for being part of today's class. To submit a question or topic for further episodes, please email elementary.schooled@outlook.com. School is out for today, but please remember, when we strengthen a child, we strengthen society.